Hey, English 165. I'm so sorry that we couldn't meet this afternoon. As I said in my email, my daughter is awaiting COVID test results. So while we wait for that, kind of our whole family is in limbo a bit, just kind of trying to figure out what to do. So, out of an abundance of caution, it was better to not meet in person this evening. The goal of our class tonight was to talk a little bit about chapter 15, which is a chapter that you read on Tuesday during our hybrid day, and to go over just kind of the basic introduction to presentations, and also to introduce you to presentation one, which is our first major presentation assignment, and then talk briefly about MLA instruction, something to be thinking about as you are moving forward with planning your presentation. Today's video is really just kind of the groundwork for the presentation. On Tuesday, when we meet in person, fingers crossed, negative test results. On Tuesday, when we meet in person, we are going to talk more in depth about what makes a good presentation, what makes a great presentation, and how you can borrow some strategies or tips or ideas from other presenters and incorporate those into your own presentation. So let's start by talking a little bit about chapter 15. And, if you haven't turned in your study guide yet on D2L, you want to do that sooner rather than later. I understand things come up. We're all just making do the best we can. Chapter 15, though, is about presentations. And I hope you can see why we're not moving numerically through the textbook, that there's a ton of good information here. But for the purpose of our class, I think it's better that we kind of jump around a bit. So chapter 15 is all about writing, practicing, giving oral presentations. And when we're looking at oral presentations, there are really 4 different kinds of presentations. There are impromptu presentations where you are called upon, perhaps in a meeting or in a class, to kind of share your thoughts, to get up and present your opinion. There are always struggle on this word. See, I'm not gonna be able to say it. Basic, rehearsed presentations. Let's just say rehearsed presentations, where you know the material, you've prepared the presentation, you've practiced it some, but you haven't written the sentences or the concepts out. So while you may have the presentation up behind you or next to you, you use that as a guide, okay? Instead of this being a really firm, set presentation. Personally, these are my favorite kind of presentations. I enjoy presentations that have good information, but don't feel overly scripted, that don't feel overly practiced, that don't feel monotonous. So these kind of rehearsed presentations are what I think about most of us are comfortable giving, right? These presentations where we've researched and we kind of get up and we present our findings and we talk about our thoughts, a little bit less formal than, say, the scripted presentation. So scripted presentations are presentations where people have to present very specific information, and it is essentially just reading a script in front of them. I often will proctor the SAT or ACT for high school students. And when I'm presenting the instructions to them, I have to read it word for word, verbatim from the manual. It's so boring. It's like 35 minutes of instruction. It's not natural. It's not entertaining. It's simply just me reading a script to them. These do have their place in presentations when it comes to providing information, making sure that certain procedures, generally really detailed facts are conveyed correctly. I think about numbers. And then the last presentation is a memorized presentation. I tend to see these more in situations where someone's having to recite something, perform something from memory. You don't have cards in front of you. You don't have a script to follow. You have to good and truly memorize your information. I used to be involved with an organization that did this poetry out loud, where students would memorize a poem and they would have to get up and recite said poem, that's an example of a memorized presentation. There is a place for these as well. These are often about like sharing a skill in that, like, this information has been memorized, it can be memorized, it can be relayed accurately. But again, I think about this being more about recitation because frankly, most of us aren't great at memorizing long passages. We can usually do a few lines or a minute or so, but after, a few lines of poetry or after a minute or so of presenting, the memory gets a little fuzzy. And these presentations are problematic in the workplace because there is nothing natural about them. It is simply somebody getting up and reciting information. And so what happens there is the focus is purely on the recitation, the memorization, and not on the information being conveyed. So again, for our purposes, these rehearsed presentations are going to be the way to go. It's kind of the best of both worlds. You have to share the information. It feels natural, or a little bit more natural. I don't think presentations ever feel truly natural. I think we all feel a little anxious about presentations. But you create as you speak. You know the information, but you can kind of change it up or go as you talk along. For me, most of the time, this is how I teach. I'll have a PowerPoint. I'll have information I know factually I want to convey. I practice that information. I run through it. Sometimes I even practice it out loud. But every class I teach is a little bit different. Things change, or I add information, or I take information out. For most of us, rehearsed presentations are what we're going to be comfortable with. When you're creating an oral presentation, it's really not terribly different than when you're writing, a paper, or you are drafting a memo or an email. You're still going to go through those phases of planning, drafting, revising, editing. Our textbook here uses a little bit of different language where they say analyzing the speaking situation, and that's important. You do have to think about where you're giving this, why you're giving this. That may change. Again, your audience changes your purpose a bit. They're going to tell you in the textbook about organizing the presentation. That is similar as to the planning process in writing. Preparing the graphics, this is, for me, in my mind, part of the drafting. Nobody wants to sit through a presentation that is just words on a PowerPoint, whether it's 5 minutes of that or 20 minutes of that or an hour of that. Word-heavy PowerPoints are essentially scripted. They are boring and problematic in terms of interaction with the audience. If you just get up and you're just reading the PowerPoint, your audience tunes out because your audience doesn't feel connected to you as a presenter. You need to be thoughtful, like we talked about with audience and purpose, about choosing the right language. Again, being thoughtful about your speaking environment. If I'm speaking to my high school students, I use different language than if I'm presenting at, a faculty meeting. I'm going to use different language at, an education panel or creative writing seminar than I might at a faculty meeting. So depending on your situation where you're giving your presentation, it may change your language, it may change your approach. It even changes the way I hold myself, carry myself, how I try to relate to my audience. So you have to be mindful. For our presentations that we're going to be doing in this class, we're giving them to our classmates. And some of your classmates may be part of your same major or career field. So the information you're conveying may be more relevant to some than others. But regardless of relevance, you want to convey a sense of naturalness. You want to make sure your audience feels connected. And there's only a few of us, right? We're a very small class, which I think is wonderful. We're going to support each other. We're going to encourage each other. So these presentations are not meant to be scary. They're not meant to be overwhelming. This is really about making sure we understand how to go through these steps of planning and drafting and revising and editing and rehearsing our presentations. So especially for our first presentation, y'all, we are going to do some peer revision, some peer rehearsal, because I think it's important that you get comfortable talking in front of people in a rehearsal format. When you're thinking about your presentation for our class, you are going to have a PowerPoint. So you do need to be thinking about the graphics and what your presentation is going to look like. Like I said, you don't want to have a super text-heavy presentation because you're going to be up and talking to us. So you want keywords, but you also want interesting graphics, and you want graphics that are dynamic, that draw people's attention. I thought it was an interesting statistic in the book. They say that 65%, there's a retention rate of 65% 3 days after a presentation, if the graphics are good. And that's because, y'all, most of us are visual learners, right? It's a very small percentage of us who are pure auditory learners, like hearing learners. Most of us don't hear something and immediately retain it. Okay, most people need to hear something 3 to 7 times before they actually remember it, before they actually retain it. For most of us, we can see something and that visual image is just easier to remember. So slides in our presentations should have some kind of visual. If you don't have an actual graphic or a visual element, then you want your slides themselves to be visually appealing. And I say slides like PowerPoint or Keynote, depending on the platform that you use. Apple is Keynote. Slides are great, PowerPoint's great, Keynote is great, and that's pretty much a fundamental presentation format that businesses use, companies use, schools use. There are other formatting platforms you could use. I like Prezi in my classroom. I use a lot of Prezis because it's a little bit more animated and visual. And we can talk about Prezi on Tuesday and kind of show you how that works. So, but again, you want to think about making sure your slides are visually appealing and visually interesting. You still want your slides to present their information. You still want them to be easy to see. You want your slides to be keywords, so easy to read. If you put a slide up there that is like 30 lines of text, your font's going to be really small. It's hard to see. So keywords there. And you want to make sure your slides are visually simple. Okay, so you want them to be very clean. You don't want 45 graphics. You don't want, crazy fonts or crazy colors. Your presentation needs to be correct, visually appealing, and easy to read, easy to understand. So moving forward a bit, just again, kind of talking through chapter 15, there are several ways you can make a lasting impression on your audience, and that's something that we're going to talk about on Tuesday. On Tuesday, we're going to watch a couple of different TED Talks, some of my very favorite TED Talks, very dynamic, very interesting speakers. And we're going to talk about how and why they make an impression on us. Okay, so there's some things we're going to come back to on Tuesday. I know many of us, when we think about presenting in a classroom environment, in a work environment, in a formal environment, the immediate thought we get when we think about presentations is anxiety. And I think this is an interesting little fact. Let me pull this up here. I Googled the top 10 phobias that we feel. And this is from America. 19% of people have a fear of public speaking. It is the number one most common phobia. So if the idea of presentations is already making you anxious or making you feel uncomfortable, please understand you are not alone in this. Everybody gets a feeling, a sense of anxiety or anxiousness or just butterflies in their tummy, maybe when they think about public speaking. That's natural. That's normal. There are some ways to work that out. I think the best thing that you can do in preparing for a presentation is to rehearse, to practice. My poor husband, whenever I have a new concept or strategy or I'm teaching something new, I run it by him. He does the same for me. He's a teacher as well. So we often hear each other's notes or lectures or assignments. You can, before a presentation, burn off a little bit of that physical energy. Sometimes when I get really anxious, it comes out. I speak faster, my hands move more, and I'm already a very hand movement speaker. Burn off a little bit of that physical energy. Before I have to give a presentation, I might walk around for a minute, jump up and down for a second. There are a couple other strategies and things we're going to talk about on Tuesday and as we get closer to the actual presentation. But I just wanted you to know that if the idea of a presentation is making you nervous, you are definitely not alone. Looking through our textbook, there are a couple of things I want to pull your attention to that weren't on the study guide. There is, if you look at page 431, some information about creating master page designs in PowerPoint. So I like personally, when I make a PowerPoint for my slides, to all have a sense of cohesive appearance. So I'll pick a theme or a style for the entire PowerPoint, a color palette, something that makes it feel all connected. So this is an idea here about how to make sure your PowerPoint is cohesive. There is other tech tips about setting up how to make things appear or dim during the presentation. Some more ideas here about images, and again, lots of little tips and strategies on using PowerPoint, which is probably what most of us will use for our presentations. There's also some information here on integrating graphics. And if you have one of the newer versions of PowerPoint, when you go to drop a graphic into a slide, on the right-hand side, it's going to give you all these different layout options. It's cool, y'all. If you haven't played the new PowerPoint lately, there's a lot of neat little features. Page 441 gives you more ideas about rehearsing, practicing, and these are really helpful strategies, y'all. Rehearsing and practicing is the key to feeling better about your public speaking, about your presentation. I also have some notes here, some ideas. These are some things I think about when I am getting ready to give a presentation. If I have to get up to speak at a conference, I, kind of work through these strategies. The most important thing you can do is to get organized. All right. A disorganized, poorly written presentation is never going to go well. Okay. It has to be thoughtful. It has to be organized. It has to be well written. You can't have a great presentation with poor material. So make sure your material is solid. Make sure your material is correct. Make sure your material is thoughtful and thorough. From there, practice, practice, practice. I often practice when I'm driving in the car, kind of work through stuff, talk through things. Understand that no one in this presentation is there to undermine you. No one is there hoping you're going to fail. And that is absolutely true of our class. We don't want each other to fail. We're there to support each other. We're all in the same boat. We're all giving presentations. So know that your audience isn't rooting for failure. Okay. Often our anxiety tells us that they are, and that's simply not true. Slow down your presentation. I have a problem with this, especially when I get anxious. It's my dog. I'm sorry. So slow down your presentation. That kind of goes back to number 2 about practicing. Watch yourself in the mirror. You're going to hate this, but it's probably the most effective advice I can give you. Film or record your audio of your presentations. I tell my students the same thing when they write papers. If you record it and you listen back to it, you're going to hear the problems faster than you'll see them. And you're going to hear issues. You're going to hear stumbling blocks. I have issues with a stutter, so sometimes there are words that even when I look at them and I know in my head how to say them, I can't get them to come out of my mouth. Okay, so if I'm filming my presentation or I'm recording it ahead of time and I notice I've stuttered over a word or I struggle over a word, when I go back and prepare, I can pull that word out. Okay, just remove that word entirely, remove that stumbling block. Give your speech to another person. Focus on the material. Again, going back to number 3, your audience isn't there to hurt you. They're not there to undermine you. But if you are still feeling anxious about the people in the audience, just forget about them. Focus on your material. Focus on you. Don't overthink your audience. Remember, again, kind of like with number 4, to slow down, pause. You start to feel really anxious, just stop for a second. Just let your audience have a moment. Okay, pause between your slides, take a breath or two. You don't get bonus points for rushing through a presentation, okay? And the last thing is to take pride in yourself. You are brilliant, strong, creative, thoughtful people, and your presentation is going to reflect that. So just go into these presentations knowing that you are already a winner. You are already a success. And these presentations are just an assignment that you have to do, okay? So enough about that, kind of a little bit about chapter 15 and presentations themselves. Let's talk about our first presentation. So when you go to D2L, you'll go to the tab that says presentations, and I have it broken down into presentation 1, 2, and 3. We're going to give 3 different kinds of presentations in our class. They're all going to be rehearsed presentations, but the first one is an informative presentation. The other 2 are research-based, and really the last one is presenting a problem and solution. So again, informative, research, and solution-based presentations. For this first presentation, you are going to present information about a task. And your topic has to be related to your field of study or your intended career in some way. So it can be related to what your focus is in college, what your future job or preferred career might be. You have to include oral instructions for a process related to some aspect of your field or your future career. Okay, so think about what you are studying right now in school, what your major is, your focus, or think about what your long-term goal is for your career. And then I want you to think through like the daily process of that job. And what's something that you would have to do, maybe not daily, but frequently in that job that you could take us step by step through and inform us of that process. You can't use recipes, tire changes, oil changes, that kind of thing. It needs to be something related to your field or your future career. Last semester, some really good examples. I had a student who was studying HVAC, and he went through the process of maintaining your air conditioning unit. It was super helpful, y'all. I did not know I was supposed to change my filters every month. I came home that night and changed my filter in my air conditioning unit, and it was gross. I have seen students last year who were in the medical field or were in like the nursing field or medical assisting who did things like giving an insulin shot or how to take a blood pressure. Okay, I have had students talk about the process of welding. I have had students talk about how to counsel someone through the grief process. Okay, this was a student who was interested in going into counseling or going into like therapy, like marriage and family therapy, anything related to your career or your field of study. I was an English major in college. So when I think about that, I could go through the process of how to write a paper. I could go through the process of how to revise and edit a poem. I could go through the process of, like there's all these really cool different literary strategies. I could go through one of those and teach you how to use a literary strategy. Those are English-related topics. As an educator, I could go through the process of, again, those other ideas of works of an English teacher, but I could also go through the process of identifying students who have like gifted, talented skills. I could go through the process of working with a student who maybe has dyslexia or a learning disability. Okay, because again, as a teacher, these are things that I have to be comfortable with and aware of and understand the process of working through that, identifying it, helping the student, those kind of informative steps. So what I want you to do for Tuesday is be thinking about what your topic could be. And I will reach out to you. We'll talk about some different ideas, but really think about different informative step-by-step kind of procedures you could tell us about. Your speech has to be 4 minutes. Okay, that's a minimum of 4 minutes. Cannot exceed 6. So on the day that we give our presentations, you'll pull your PowerPoint up and you'll give your presentation. I will film it. Not film it. Why am I saying that? We film the third presentation. I will time it. All right, and I will let you know when you've hit the 4-minute mark, and I will let you know when you're getting close to the 6-minute mark. And at 6 minutes, I cut you off. Not to be rude, but because in the business world, you have to respect meeting timelines. If you are scheduled to give a presentation from 10 to 10:15, but you talk over and you go to 10:30, what you're telling your clients or you're telling your business associates is that you don't value their time. You don't value the schedule. So this 4 to 6 minute window for our presentations is firm. Okay, that is kind of a foundational element of this. Your speech is going to include a PowerPoint presentation with at least 5 slides, including a works cited if research information is used. So if you use research information, if you go and you pull resources, you have to have a works cited. On D2L, there is a folder about works cited. Here we go. It's called MLA instructions. My 2-year-old is having a meltdown because she's supposed to be taking a nap, but she doesn't want to. So you probably hear her crying. There is a document here about creating a works cited and some other MLA formatting things about in-text citation. Here's a YouTube video that I've created. I think that one's me. Let me see if that's me or not. I don't remember.
Hi, this is Amy.
It's not. Okay, I have one that I've made that I'll post as well. So these are helpful strategy or things to think about when you're doing MLA. Y'all use EasyBib, use CitationNet. There are such great resources out there now that you can just kind of take your website you found information on, plug it in, it generates the citation for you. We can talk more about it on Tuesday. The reason I'm mentioning it now is as you start working on your presentation, as you start planning or thinking about it, if you find yourself pulling information off a website or out of a book, mark that website. Okay, remember where you get the information from. It is absolutely vital that you cite information that you pull from elsewhere. If you don't, your presentation, your writing material, whatever it is, could be flagged for plagiarism, and that's not a good look. You don't ever want someone to question your academic or professional integrity. So citing your sources is really just giving credit where credit is due. So as you start to research or look for ideas, note where you get information. A works cited is absolutely mandatory if you borrow information from other places. And you may or may not need it for this presentation because this is more informative step by step. You may already know the steps you want to take or the steps you go through. The second and third presentations are research-based, so you will have to have a works cited for those. Again, we'll come back to MLA. I'll walk you through CitationNet, EasyBib. I think Citation Machine is another good one. Really, really great resources that help you. Once upon a time, you had to memorize MLA. We don't have enough brain space for that, y'all. You got other things you need to remember. Let the internet help you. There are good resources. So your speech has to include organizers, summaries, transitions. Basically, use visual elements. Use the features in PowerPoint or Prezi. I'll show you Prezi on Tuesday. Make use of those so that your presentation is dynamic and interesting. Your oral instructions need to be clear and comprehensive, okay? And they need to include visual aids, and those can be physical or digital. So I had a student who did how to take a blood pressure last semester, and she brought in a blood pressure cuff, and she went through the process showing us on the actual, can't remember what it's called now, the actual instrument, how to take a reading. I think if we hadn't been in COVID, she probably would have used a model, which would have been awesome. COVID prevents that. So we are having to think about readjusting things a little bit. You want your instructions to be so clear that if I wanted to follow them, I could. So like my student who gave a presentation on maintaining air conditioner so that you didn't have to have as many service calls, I came home that night and I was able to do what he said to do. Okay. After my student gave informative speech on how to give an insulin shot, I do feel confident that if I needed to do that, I could. So you want your instructions to be clear and comprehensive so someone could actually perform said task. Very important, again, this is an academic presentation, so weapons, tobacco, alcohol, drugs, other people are not allowed as visual aids, okay? And also, too, weapons, drugs, violent issues are not topics that are appropriate in a professional or an academic setting. So, again, your visual aid needs to be either something work-related, inanimate, something not living, preferably, or a PowerPoint. Okay, so either a physical aid that you can show us or a digital. Every student is going to have to pick a different topic for the informative speech. You can post it on a discussion board, or you can email it. Emailing it might be better. Trying to think of how I want to do that, because the discussion boards sometimes are difficult. Tell you what, just brainstorm over the next day or so. And when we come back to class on Tuesday, we'll pick our topics, kind of decide what we're going to do. So maybe generate a topic or two, maybe 2 ideas in case someone else has the same idea that you do. If I can get the discussion board up and running, mine have been not working well lately. I will do that too, so we can post there. But for right now, let's just be brainstorming. Let's just think about what we want to do. And when we come to class on Tuesday, we're going to talk about what makes a presentation good or great. We're going to talk about a little more about MLA and what to be thinking about or looking at. I'll show you those good websites that can be helpful. We'll talk about different presentation topics and what we're wanting to do. And we'll continue on with our agenda. Let me pull our calendar up so we can kind of talk through what we need to do. If you haven't taken the quiz on chapters 1, 4, and 9, please do that as soon as possible. Also, check and see that you've turned in your study guides. Should be chapters 1, 4. We did 1 together, so it should be 4, 9, and 15. Okay, so that's going to be about audience and purpose, writing and correspondence. 15 is about the oral presentations. I asked you to look over chapter 5, but there wasn't a study guide for that. All right, so asking you to kind of know for Tuesday what you want to, or a couple of different ideas for your presentation. And we're going to talk about those. You don't have any other reading to do over this weekend for class on Tuesday. Just be thinking about your presentation. All right. You'll email me if you need anything. Thank you for your patience and your flexibility. I so appreciate that. But I am just an email away if you need anything. Have a good afternoon.